All right, in this segment, I want to start talking a little bit about getting this header styled. So I just opened up my XD file so that I can refer back to it and get some ideas about color and placement and, sort of revisit some of my original ideas. So one of the things that this doesn't really show me is the fact that I want to be able to have a persistent header that stays here while other content scrolls underneath it. So that is one thing that we need to account for that's going to be a little bit different. So if I, or at least in my case, it doesn't have to be that way for yours. But I want to go ahead and, first of all, I want to get this color. And one of the ways that I can do that is I can right click my swatch and I can just say copy the color. And I'm going to go ahead and go down there to minimize that. And let's start looking at this. So if we go over here to the Canon electric site that we've got going so far, one of the things that you'll notice actually that I forgot to take a peek at is that we don't have a background image. All right, you'll notice that. So let's go ahead and just toss the background image in. In order to do that, I need to go to the dashboard and I want to go over here to appearance and where it says background, I want to click on that. And we're going to go and find our background image. So let's do a select image. And I don't have it in the media library yet, so I'm going to go ahead and upload it. I'll select it. And right now, it's going to be in that Canon Electric resource folder, and it's under images. It's actually the second one in the list right here where it says tool on instructions. It's that one. So I'll go ahead and click on open. And we're going to make that the background for the entire page. And as soon as that's finished loading, and I'm not going to give this alt text because I know that it's only going to be loaded up in the CSS. You could if you want. I'll just put tool on instructions, pliers or something like that. Okay, so we're going to choose that and we're going to save and publish. And so here's the thing. We have right now, if you remember, we have, let's refresh this, these background colors behind these other sections. So it's kind of hard to see what's happening right there. But we'll change that later. Let's focus right now just on dealing with the header at the moment. And so I think that if we were to go back to our original mock-up and we stick to what we're doing there, then we have a solid color back behind the picture, and this tagline where it says 24/7 residential and commercial electrical service. It's going to go up underneath Canon Electric. It's going to sort of slot right up in that empty space. And then we'll deal with the nav separately later, but let's just go ahead and work with what we've got there. And I'm going to show you a way. This is kind of how I do a lot of designing when I'm trying to figure out my CSS and WordPress stuff, because WordPress has so many moving parts that it's really kind of nice to use the browser. And so I'm going to go ahead and right click up here and we're going to do an inspection. And let's just look at the parts that we have. So first of all, this whole header right here, where it says header masthead, and then it has a class that says site header on it. That is something that I want to actually, I want it to be fixed so that other content has to go up underneath it. So the first thing I'm going to do before I do anything is I'm going to go ahead and create a new, with this little plus symbol, a new inspector style sheet rule. And remember, these are temporary rules. And automatically it tried to create one for header masthead, the masthead ID. But I'm going to go ahead and do something that's for the class of site header instead. And the reason is that that's more commonly used than the masthead ID. Site header is a lot more commonly used whenever people are styling in WordPress. So anyway, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to say position like this, and then we're going to say fixed. And then all of a sudden you see that everything sort of changes. It looks like we've lost our background image. Well, we haven't really lost it. The reason that it looks this way is because all of the content in this part down here, right here, where it says div and it says class is site content, all of that part moved up because whenever I took this entire header out right here, this header, whenever I took it out of the document flow by giving it a position of fixed, it's sort of like, I like to describe it like kids standing in line for ice cream at school, right? If one kid gets yanked out of line because he got in trouble for something, none of the other kids are going to wait for that child and leave that spot open. They're all going to move forward. They're going to move up in the line as soon as that child is pulled out of the flow of the line. Well, that's kind of what the document flow is like, right? So because this is fixed, it now is pulled out of the document flow, so all the other content moves up higher. We'll deal with that in just a minute. The other thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and give this a background color. This is that one that I wanted to give, you know, that orange background color, that sort of tangerine color. And you'll notice right off the bat that because I made it position fixed, it's not going 100%. So one of the things I need to do is I need to tell it to have a width of 100%, like that. And the height can be automatic. You know, it's going to be as big as it needs to be. And now you'll notice that it doesn't want to scroll. It seems like it's not scrolling, but it's because it's fixed. Other things are scrolling underneath. And then don't worry about the size. We'll deal with that whenever we deal with the scale of the SVG graphic up here. And then also we want to make sure that we give it a z-index. So we'll do z-index, and we want this to always be pretty much on top of everything. I'm going to put it at like 899, or I could put it at 900, and that gives me a little bit of wiggle room if I need to go up above 900 for some reason, like if I have an overlay or some other kind of thing that needs to go on top of this. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. And the other thing that I could do just to be safe is I'm going to give it a left position and be explicit about it. So left 0 and top 0. Remember, these are regular positioning elements. These are not the same as margins. And one thing that you'll notice that's a little bit tricky, all right, is that whenever I did this, you see now it's really up high because I am currently logged in, and this is something that's going to be a little bit tricky for you, is if you're doing something like this, is that I'm currently logged in, and so I have this bar up here that is going to by default go on top of everything. And so really the rest of my design is up underneath that. So if I just leave that off for a second though, then that's kind of more what it's actually going to look like. So I'll just leave that deselected like that so that when I take it out of my inspector style sheet, it'll show up as commented, and I can always just uncomment it later. Okay, so I've got the site header set up now. Now the other elements that we need to take a look at would be like site branding. All right, here's the site branding. And inside of site branding is where I've got my custom header image, and that's what that SVG is right there. And when I select that A, here's my image that's inside of it, okay? And then I've got this H1, which we'll get rid of later because it's a duplicative thing for this name over here. And then we've also got our H2, that's the tagline for the 24/7 residential commercial, blah, blah, blah. We'll deal with that in just a second too. First of all, what I want to do is, because I need to make this tagline, I need to make that absolute. I need to make it absolutely positioned so that it'll always go up underneath where it says Canon Electric. I need to make that absolute, but I don't want it to be absolute to the entire viewport. I want it to be absolute in relationship to the site branding. So in order to do that, what I need to do is tell site branding, I want to give a little plus symbol and make a new rule for site branding that says that the position is relative. And relative, things that have a relative position will allow for its children or its descendants to have absolute positions that are absolute in relationship to the location of the parent, right? Like in this case, site branding is the parent with a relative position. Okay, so next thing I can do, I'll just leave site branding like that for a moment. And the other thing too that I want to take a look at is this image, right? So that's the SVG, and we don't have a rule for it already, so I'm going to click on the plus symbol, and all it's doing right now is it's coming up with image, but I want to be really specific, and I want to say that the site branding image that's inside of an A tag. Okay, so this is an IMG that's inside of an A tag that's inside of the site branding div. So I'm going to make a rule for that, and I'm going to tell it to be, let's say that it is going to be a width of, let's try about 60% of the screen. And I think I might be comfortable with that. It might be a little bit bigger than my mock-up, but I think I like kind of like the way that that would scale. But whenever it gets really small, and I'll deal with what's happening here in just a second, but when it gets really small, it might get too small. And so I want to think about the smallest possible screen dimension that I care about, which is about 320 pixels for an old iPhone. So let's say that we have a min width. Okay, so let's do min width of about, let's do about 310 pixels, all right? And that'll give us a little bit of space. All right, so we've got that going, all right? And now I need to kind of look at this H1 right here, and I want to get rid of that. Okay, so I'm going to make a new rule because it's not for every H1, it's for the H1 whose class is assigned to site title. So that actually identified the selector properly when I clicked on the plus symbol. And I want to give this a text indent. Let's find that. Well, let's do text. Yeah, I should have just typed it. Text indent of negative 9,999 pixels, like that, okay? And then it makes it jump off the screen. However, it doesn't do something weird like pull it out of the document flow, and it doesn't mess it up for screen readers. So somebody who has a screen reader who maybe can't read this SVG can at least read the H1 site title. All right. Now, the thing that you might notice is that it still looks like it's occupying space, like vertical space. So what I also want to do is I want to give it a height of 1 pixel, and then it collapses, which is good. Okay, so I want that H1 to jump off the page, and so far that pretty much I would have to have like a million TV screens put together for it to actually show up. All right, and well, I shouldn't say a million, I'd have to have a lot, probably like 4 or 5 of them strung together. And then I give it a height of 1 pixel. And you could also do something if you wanted. You could also do, you know, a really, really small font size. Like, you know, that's another option. You could do font size of like, you know, 0.01 M or rem even. So it'd be even smaller, like if you want to just sort of have a backup. Okay, and so now we want to get this 24/7 residential and commercial thing up here. So I'm going to find that, and you see I'm highlighting it in the HTML, and that is showing up in blue up here, so that I know that that's the right selection. So I'm going to click the plus symbol again, and it actually gets the right H2 version. It's h2.site-description, so it's getting the class appropriate selector name. And I want to do something. This is where I want to make the position. I want to make this absolute, like that, because I want to force it to sort of fit up here. So we can say that the position is, you know, from the top. Let's say that it's, I don't know, something like, I don't know, 50%, and see, oops, I gotta do this right there, 50%, let's say, and that's close, right? It's sort of close. Maybe 55% would be better, or even 53%, something like that, from the top. And then from the left, let's say that I want it to come in about 15%. That's pretty close. And we could say, well, let's see what happens at 14. That's a little too far over. What about 14.5? Let's try 14.75. That might be the one right there. And we probably should also give it a z-index just to be safe, in case later we have other absolute elements. And oops, it just disappeared on me. Okay, z-index. And then let's do this at like 801 or something like, or 901. Okay, because its parent is 900, so let's give that a 901. And let's just see what happens when we start to scale this and see if it really breaks down. I mean, it'll break down a little bit once we get like that small. We have to figure something out for that. But, you know, so far it's really not breaking down too badly. One thing that you might consider is how big you want the font size of this to be, because whenever I get on smaller screens, you know, it starts to become too dominant, this tagline becomes more dominant than the actual logo of the company. So we want to give that a font size. Let's do font size, and this is where it kind of gets tricky. We don't want to do rem or anything like that because we want it to adjust with the width of the screen. So this is where we kind of need to do something in vertical, or excuse me, not vertical, in viewport width, so in a VH unit, instead of doing like M or rem or something like that. And then it'll be based off of the width of the viewport. So let's say that we're going to do something like, I don't know, 3 VW, and that's really big, right? So that's probably too big. Maybe, let's see, about 2, maybe even 2.5, 2.2, 2.25 possibly. Oops, let's try 2.25. I keep messing it up. Maybe 2. Anyway, maybe 2.2, something like that. And then you see that it starts to scale a lot more effectively with the rest, and I think that I can live with that. And so I'm pretty happy so far with a lot of these changes. So if I go to the inspector style sheet here, something else too that I probably would want is like a little bit of a drop shadow, or I think if I refer back to XD, yeah, I've got some, actually have some heavier lines. So maybe on this top line, the top line would be the very top of the page header, or I think that's called the site header, and then maybe this bottom one could be a line that's on the bottom of the same. Okay, so let's take a look at that. We could also put that on the navigation as well. But yeah, let's look at the site header, and let's give it a border. Let's do border, actually let's do border top, and let's say that I think it was like 10 pixels if I go back here. Let's see, if I click on that, well, it says it's about 20 here. So let's take a peek over here and see if that actually works. Say 20 pixels, solid, and that's pretty heavy. And you can probably see like right up here it jumped down. So solid, and then we'll do 0, 0. Oops, that's not a 0. 0, 0, 0, and then that's a solid black. And so I might be okay with 20. I might be a little bit heavy. We can always come back and revisit that. And then we can also do border bottom. And let's say bottom. And let's do, let's say, I think that one was more like maybe 7 pixels. We can go back and check, but we can eyeball it right now. It might be a little bit too heavy, I think. And we also might be able to tell a lot better whenever we get our navigation styled properly. Let's choose something like 5 pixels, and it might even be less than that. Let's start with like 3. I guess we can start with 5 and come back later. And also if we do like 3 or something, or let's try 4, we can also add a drop shadow. So we can say box shadow. And we don't have to worry about putting any kind of, dash WebKit or dash Mozilla or any of those things like prefixes, because we are using, the modernizer and the response.js so that it brings all of those kinds of things up to speed. So anyway, I'm going to do a box shadow of, let's do 0 for how it vertically orients itself, and then it's the horizontal shift, but it's the way that it looks vertically. And then maybe let's say a couple of pixels, and maybe 5 pixel spread or blur, and then let's do RGBA. So we've got something like 0.5 maybe. All right, and then let's try that and see how that looks. And then, this is how we've got it scrolling. And we can always come back and change the heaviness of this dark line here. But what's really nice is that at this point, if I do a select all right here, let's try that, oops, select all. I've just selected all those styles that I just made in my inspector style sheet, okay? I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to go back into my Dreamweaver style sheet, and I'm going to find the appropriate place to put that. And so, and actually, if you look up here, we've got you know, something for typography. Some of that was typography, but right now I'm going to put everything in a different place. We've got 3.0 is elements, and in 10, where it says 10.0, we've got posts and pages, asides, comments, right? So you can look through here to kind of get an idea of where you think it might be the most logical to place this stuff. So, but the thing is, I don't want to put it in the content, because if you think about what the actual content is, it's actually below the header. Like if you were to literally look at the names of the, you know, the things, like if I collapse this header, right, and then I look here where it says div ID equals content, and that's the site content, like where the widgets are and all the page stuff and like all that, then maybe I don't want to leave it in that. Maybe I want to create something that's special and separate for the header. So let's go back to our code view, and I think I want to make something that's kind of like in between, where it's like after forms but before navigation. So I'm going to scroll down and find the end of number 4 and the beginning of number 5. And so that's number 3, there's 4, so we'll find the end of 4 and the beginning of 5. So here I'm going to come down and I'm going to paste all of that stuff that I just made, and I'm going to take right here where it says navigation. Okay, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to paste that, because none of this is dealing with the actual site content. All right, this is all just dealing with stuff that's up in the header. And I'm going to call this 4, or let's call this 5 point, I don't know, 0, 0, and we're going to change this down here where this is 5 point, I guess, 0, 1. Okay, and I can change this up here at the top just to be clear. I'll make the 5.0 navigation, I'll call it 5.01, and then I'll call this 5.0, oops, sorry, 5.00. I'll call that the header. Okay, and this gets a little bit different up here where it's like, you know, 0, 1 jumps to 5.1. Okay, well, we can say 5.02, 5.03. Let's do that. And we'll just change that so for consistency. You can keep it however you want. Some people don't get that meticulous, but it's better to start off a little bit more meticulous than, you know, than not. So we'll say 5.02, that's what we said, and 0, 3. Okay. All right, so let's jump back up here, and I'm going to change this to header. And now I know that this stuff is dealing with my header. Okay, and then this is something that I do need to uncomment, because, well, we can leave it the way it is for right now. And if we test it in some other browser where I'm not logged in, you'll see if it gets messed up or not. Let's go ahead and save this, and we're going to upload it and see what happens. Let's go ahead and put it up on the server, and come back over here. And I'm not going to refresh this page just in case I missed something. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate this, and it'll give me a brand new fresh page. And I'm going to go ahead and do refresh, and there we go. You see that it's actually taking my styles properly, and we can, oops, we can start to adjust it like this, and see what happens. And then this is where this right here, the tagline kind of starts to break down a little bit. And so this is where we would definitely need to make an adjustment for media queries and stuff. So I would say that if we were to inspect this, we can see at what point it starts to break down. I'd say it starts breaking down at probably at about 530 pixels or so. And the reason is because if you remember, we put a minimum width on this Canon Electric SVG, and so the other thing just keeps on scaling, and so we want it to stop scaling right there, and let's say at about 533 pixels. So we would need to do something where we've got some sort of media query that addresses that. And you can make little notes like this. And like what I'll do is I'll have just a text file open, just a plain text file, and I'll put like, 533 pixels is the minimum width, for the tagline. For tagline scaling, I can make a little note there so that I don't forget to go and fix that. And then, try to see if there are any other issues. Now, the thing is that I don't have a really, really big screen right now, and so I'm limited to how much exactly I can test. I can kind of keep drawing my browser out and kind of move my browser window over and stuff, but it still doesn't give me a true sense, from like the way it would look on a gigantic monitor. So I'd have to, find a large monitor and go test it separately. But for right now, I think that this is probably pretty good. And then I still, of course, have to deal with my navigation. That'll be one of the next things that I do. But before I do that, one of the other things is that, look, my content, it's starting up here underneath everything. And so I need to address that. So one of the things that I can do is I can come over here where it says div ID equals content. And then I can look in that and say, okay, well, that's the site content. Let's make a thing where we've got dot site dash content. And we can do that with a padding. You don't want to do a margin because margin is in relationship to other objects. Let's do a padding. Let's actually do a padding top of like maybe 200 pixels or so. Let's see how that looks. And it's going to change. This is the thing, it's going to change depending on how big that SVG gets. And so this is one of those other challenges where, you have to kind of pay attention to, like, do we want a max width on this Canon Electric so that we have sort of a variable that we can deal with so it doesn't get too big. And that might be something that would be really helpful to have. You could also do the padding top like in a percentage, but that starts to get a little bit tricky too, because percentage of what? The viewport width or the viewport height? And like sometimes it might be different. We could try something like and the reason that the percentage worked for placing this residential commercial thing was because it was absolute inside of a relative container. So it was, the vertical percentage was based off of, this header, and the header scaling was constantly being based off of the scaling of this SVG. And so there was a very close relationship to how those two things were scaling together. So it was more predictable. Whereas, the site content is outside of that. It's outside of that header. There's, it has no relationship to it. So we might have a little bit of an uphill battle with that, and we could try something like we could mess around like what happens if we did 5, CVW, right? Or 15 VW, or 20 or 25 or something like that. But the thing is that that's going to really change, and it's going to get bigger the wider it is. But maybe whenever it's like this, it's not big enough, right? So that's where I think that we're going to have a little bit of a challenge, where we might need to restrict how big this Canon Electric actually does get. So that might be where we'd come here and do another inspection. We'll take a look, and we've got a min width. So, what say if we did like a maximum width as well? We could do like maybe 1280 is the maximum width of this screen. So let's say if this is 60% of that, let's get my calculator out. So we could look at what is, well, I should say I think it's like 1250 right now. So times 0.6, that's 750. So we could say that we want a max width of 750, something like that. I'm just kind of messing around right now. 750 pixels. All right, and so that it won't get any larger than that. And we could also try it just to see how well it's scaling. If I set it to 650, yeah, see, and it stops scaling at 650, right? So we could make a decision at some point, no matter how big the screen gets, that we want it to stop scaling like at 650 or maybe 700. And that gives us a little bit more of a range that we can work within. Okay, so, and then you'd have to deal with, where this stops scaling, right? This residential and commercial thing. So let's take that and let's do an inspector thing and let's take a look at that. All right, so we've got a font size of 2.2 VW, all right? And that's the viewport width, the total viewport width. But at some point that's going to stop. So what we would have to do is we would have to say, okay, well, once it hits a certain place, the font size is going to have to go to something that's fixed for a min width and for a max width, all right? And so I think that we can kind of decide that if it's going to stop scaling right here, right, somewhere in here, and maybe we do want this to go to maybe 1250. Let's jump this up here. Let's go back. Let's say that that's 750. That might be a little bit better in terms of just even a screen dimension like this one. So once we get to about, I want it to be like 1280, but it's not quite. So if we said, see, that's 1280 right there. I think we'd be okay. So we could do, once it gets to 1280, that it will change, right? So we need to make another quick note. And so we'd say 1280 is the max width for tagline scaling. All right. And then that means that basically what we do is change to rem, m, one of those two. Okay, because right now it's in viewport width. Okay, so those are two little quick notes of things that we'd need to do. And that, of course, is also, if you remember, that also means that we need to add that max width of 750 pixels to our site branding image. So let's just jump back over here. And some of this wouldn't be this complicated if you weren't using a scalable SVG that was going to scale so nicely. You could just leave it at one size and you wouldn't have quite as many of these issues, but it's kind of nice to have an SVG, and so we're going to try to work with it. So let's go ahead and save this, and I'm going to go ahead and stop this video here, and then you can move on and we'll continue.